I'm going to show you a method how I build my arrows to give me maximum performance. And if you follow these steps, you'll probably end up with the best arrows that you've ever had. Alright, what are we going to need for today's project? Well, we have the shafts that we're going to use, we have the fletching, we have the components like the field points and the inserts, and then I've got some super glue, I've got some extra knocks here that I'm going to use. You might also need that, it will help you out a lot. We're going to float some arrows later, and then you'll see exactly when it's going to come in handy. Those must be the same as the knocks on the back of the arrow. You're going to need a arrow scale, you're going to need a arrow square, I use a G5 one, you're going to need a Sharpie, you're going to need a earbud, and then you're going to need some paper towels, and you're going to need a floating device. I use my arrow case, you can use anything. You just need to be able to float an arrow in here, and then you're going to need some dishwashing liquid. Then once you have this, you are ready to start your project. You're also going to need an arrow cutter. If you don't have an arrow cutter, you'll have to rely on a buddy, or you have to use your pro shops. Speak to them. You'll need someone to help you out if you don't have one. In front of me here, I've got the arrows I'm going to build while you build yours. And the first step you're going to do is you're going to remove the knocks, right? So I can do it with my hand like I did with these. You just take the knock out and you put them one side. If there are any collars on your arrow, you're going to also have to remove that. This method applies for parallel shafts. If you're using something like an X10 or Pro Tour, you should skip this step. I don't recommend it for those arrows. This is just for parallel shafts. And then also, when you cut it off from the back, just keep in mind, you have to work out the arrow length. You're going to cut it twice. So if you cut an inch off the back and the front, it's going to be 2 inches, not 1 inch. So you need to figure out how much you're going to cut off the back. I'll say inch is fine, especially when it's good arrows. You don't need to cut off that much from the back. This is just to take out the imperfections, and usually the imperfections on the ends of the arrows. So the first step obviously now is to take off the knocks, and then we're going to cut the arrows from the back. I'm going to go ahead and do that and cut an inch off the back. Okay, so I've cut my arrows off at the back. Why do we cut our arrows off at the back? Is because arrows are more wobbly at the end of the arrows, and by cutting arrows off the back, you're probably going to cut off a wobbly piece or a crooked piece of the arrow most of the time. Then the next step, what we're going to do is after we cut the arrows off at the back, we're going to square them. Okay, so you're going to square all your arrows. Just make sure that you are squaring them at the back, because that's where you cut it from. So we're going to do all the arrows and make sure that they are perfectly square. So then after you've done the squaring, we're going to put the knocks back in from the back, obviously. Just make sure you put them from the back. You can use a knock tool here as well. Don't, like put it in and then jam it in like this. You're going to damage the ends of the knock. And obviously, that's not a good thing. So make sure the way you get it in is not damaging the knocks in any form. You can put it on the string as well if you want, and you can rotate it on if you want. So yeah, that is that step done. Our shafts were cut from the back, they were squared from the back, and then obviously the knocks went in from the back. So now we're going to do the next step. So now the next step is you're going to cut it to the correct length. Just make sure of this, guys. If you cut it too short, you can't make it longer. This is the golden rule. So just make sure before you cut it now that it's the right length. Mark it where you want, get someone to mark it, and just make sure you're cutting it at the right length. Once it's cut, it's cut. You can't do anything about it. So let's do that, and then we'll do the next step. Okay, so the next step, what you're going to do is you're going to take a Q-tip, right, and you're going to clean it from the front. Make sure that all that carbon is out. So when you stick your inserts, you know that it's clean. Now the next step, what you're going to do is you're going to add knocks from the front. You're going to put knocks in all the arrows. Then it's going to look something like this. You got knocks in the back and the front now. Now we're going to do the floating test. We want consistency, and we want to determine where to put our index vein on to get the same flex out of the arrows as it's coming out of the bow every time. So let's get to the test and I'll show you how it works. Make sure that you have a few drops of dishwashing liquid inside your floating device into the water. Okay, so you put your first shaft into the water and you hold it underneath the surface a little bit, make sure it's like covered all the way, and then you just let it go. And I can see that this part is wanting to be on top. You turn it around so it's opposite and you let it go, and that part comes back the same way. So it's always wanting to go there. So what you do then is you take it out of the water in that way, exactly. You put it down, dry it in the back, and then you put a Sharpie mark on that line at the top. That's where your index vein will go. And then you do it with all the arrows. And hold it underneath for a little bit, let it go. That pops up at the top. I can see the name there. And then that it always goes back to the same point. Same thing, you take it out, dry it in the back, and then you put your Sharpie mark right at the top. And that's where you're going to fletch your index vein. You're going to rotate the knock when you're fletching arrows, which will go through, and then that's where your index vein will go. So if you like to use a 4 fletch, which I also like to use, your indexing will be between the veins. Like say this was my spine over here on the shaft. I'm going to fletch my arrows and I make the mark. I'm going to straddle that line. I'm not going to fletch it on that line, so that you know that your indexing or your spine is always going to show at the top. So if you make this a different color, like say silver, what you can see easy, when you knock your arrow, you know that this is your spine and it's always has to show up. So you're always going to straddle it. You're not going to necessarily mark it. You're not going to fletch it on that line. You're going to fletch it in between. So this will just make it easier for you. Okay, now the next step, what we're going to do is we're going to remove the knocks from the front. Okay, so after you have the knocks out, you're going to keep them separate for future use. Okay, now before we stick the inserts or our target points, we're going to go ahead and square our shafts where we cut it from the front. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and square the shafts where we cut them from the front, and you're going to go ahead and obviously do it with all the shafts. So what you're going to do next is you're going to match them up, and you're going to put your arrows from the lightest to the heaviest, and your components the same, from the lightest to the heaviest. Now what I do is, these are my lightest arrows at the top, these two are 270, or these three, and then these are 271. And then my inserts are 49, 49, 50, 50, 50. So what I'll do next, I'll put my heaviest insert with my lightest arrow, right? So this is running from 49 to 50 on the insert side. The arrows are running from 270 to 71. So what I'll do is I'll just cross it over, and I'll put my heaviest arrow or my heaviest insert with my lightest arrow, and then I'll cross it over like this. This is also a heavy insert. I'll put it with a light arrow, and I'll put a heavy insert with a light arrow, and these are the lighter inserts with the heavier arrows, and then I know they're matched up. You can even do this with veins. This is splitting hairs though. They're pretty consistent, but you can also do it with the veins if you would like. I weigh these are all the same, so I'm not going to do it, but do check it. If you are splitting hairs like me, you might want to check it out. And then obviously afterwards you can check your points as well. You can mix and match it. So you know that's going to change obviously. You know that's not fixed to the arrow, so that you're going to do last. So the next step is to glue your inserts or your outserts. I like to use hot melt. You do not heat the carbon ever. Okay, so like what I like to do is I heat up the hot melt itself, and then I will just put some hot melt towards the back. Not all the way, because you'll notice there is some thread in the back. That's where your brass weights will go if you want to add some later. And then I heat it up a little bit more. I've got lots of space to work here with, so I won't burn my fingers. And then, you know, you don't want it to boil. You don't want to see bubbles, in my opinion. You don't want it too hot, just so that it's hot enough to kind of make a gooey paste, and then you just pop your insert all the way in. And you do this with all your inserts into your arrows. Then again, you heat up the hot melt, you put it more towards the back, make sure you don't get hot melt into that thread of the insert in the back. Heat it up just before it boils. Just slide into the shaft all the way back, make sure it's all the way around, and then let it cool. So after it's cooled down, you will just, it's going to make like a kind of like a donut around the insert, and yeah, you can just rub this off when it's cooled down, and they will make like donuts as they come off, and then you know you're ready to go. By this time, you will realize that arrow building is not a lot of fun, in my opinion. I don't like it particularly because it's so time consuming, but don't give up, guys. The reward will surface later when you start shooting, and you'll appreciate what you've done here. So I'm with you, it's no fun. I don't like arrow building, but some people do. Maybe you can build arrows for me then. If you like building arrows, yeah, maybe I can send them to you. Let me know in the comments. Okay, so the next step is you're going to put the points into your shafts. So the next step is you're going to take one shaft, right? You don't need all of them. They're all going to spin the same direction. And we're going to determine what rotation your arrows have, if it's an anti-clockwise or clockwise rotation. Most strings are built clockwise, so this will mean that your arrow will spin anti-clockwise. It spins the opposite direction of the twist of your string usually. That's the theory, but it's good to test it anyway to make sure. So let me show you how to do it. Grab your bow, get an arrow, and we'll head out to the shooting range, and you don't need a lot of space to do this. Okay, so I'm out here on the range and I'm about to shoot. The thing that you have to remember is that it has to be the bow and the arrow combination that you're going to use in this test. And then the other thing is make sure that the mark is to the top that you made on the shaft, and so that you can follow if it's rotating left or right. So you'll see 4 yards away it will just start rotating, like about a quarter of the way it will start rotating left or right. As I said, most strings are clockwise, so this one should rotate anti-clockwise, but we're going to check it anyway. And then yeah, 4 yards away, and then my mark is pointing at the top, and then I'm going to go ahead and shoot my bear shaft. When you get to your arrow, inspect it. In my case, my mark is sitting on the left side here now, which means it's rotating anti-clockwise. It turned about a quarter of the way, and the natural spin of this arrow will be anti-clockwise, and I will explain more about it when we get inside. So I just want to talk about the rotation. You hear a lot of things about this. You can ignore the step if you want. I don't think it's like night and day difference. I don't think it's going to make, I think it's going to make maybe a 1% difference or 2%. In my opinion, I don't think it's like a major train wreck if you have a right helical jig. I wouldn't go out and buy a left helical jig, in my opinion. There are a few things to consider. If you are hunting and you have field points, or you have broadheads that screw in, so all broadheads will screw in clockwise, and if your arrow is flying anti-clockwise, you're going to have some problems sometimes that it will loosen up your broadhead or your field point. Now, there are ways around it. You can tighten them up pretty good, or you can put some thread lock on there, or hot melt, or whatever you want to use. It's just a thing to consider. But the effect it has on accuracy, look, I'm divided about this. Obviously, it would make sense. If your arrow is rotating left, you want to fletch with the rotation. But I do think the forces of the fletching are stronger than the natural rotation that your bow will send your bear shaft downrange. Remember, we're going to fletch it. So once you start shooting your arrow, that forces of 300 feet a second or 280 or whatever you're shooting, I think it's a lot stronger than the natural rotation. So all I'm saying is, if you don't want to do it, don't lose sleep about it. But if you want to do it, then you will probably gain a slight advantage. I don't know if it's 1 or 2%, but that's up for you to decide. And I'm just showing you the optimum way of building arrows. So we're going to fletch the arrows now. At this stage, you can do your ritual, what you like. I don't clean it with all the acetones and all the chemicals. I don't like chemicals too much. I haven't found it necessary to do that. Some veins prefer it with bonings. I use the X3. I don't have any problems with getting them to stick, so I don't use any chemicals on the arrows, and they're also apparently pre-treated. So, but do whatever you want, your regime that you like to go through. I like to just do it like I do. And also remember, if your super glue is super old, you probably need to get new ones. This is brand new. And yeah, now we're going to fletch the arrows, and you can go through your preferred method. The important thing here is to start fletching on that mark. So if you use wraps, this is a good time to put it on before you fletch. I personally don't use wraps. I think it's an extra step. I don't mind them, but yeah, it's just an extra thing that can go wrong for me. So when you put wraps on, just make sure you leave a bit of a gap to the end of the shaft. You still want to be able to see cracks, and you don't want the wrap to cover the cracks and have a nasty surprise when you shoot. Here you're going to need the paper towel. This is what I like to use, and I'll put it there for illustration purposes. Then what you do is you just put like your normal layer of glue. You can put dots, whatever you do, but the important thing is to get it evenly across. And then make sure everything is covered with a thin layer of glue. And then you just press it on the paper towel to get rid of the excess glue. And then you just put it on. At this stage, you have to make sure all your fletch is in contact with the arrow and your jig is probably set up. That's very important. So at this stage, you can go ahead and fletch all your arrows in that manner. You're obviously going to do the other veins now. This is not a fletching video, otherwise that's going to add too much time onto the video, and I don't want it too long. If you would like me to do a video on how to set up your jig, I can also do that, and also the in-depth detail on how to fletch arrows. The basics that I've showed you here is more than enough. Just make sure it's set up correctly, then you should be fine. So go ahead, fletch all your arrows. I'm going to do it now, and then we'll go to the next step. So this step, you're going to weigh your arrows actually. You're going to weigh each one and make sure that they are within 1 grain of each other, I'll say, preferably half a grain. And then if you are shooting field points, you can swap these points around, matching the heaviest with the lightest arrow. And then also, by the time it gets to hunting, you can take your lightest broadhead and put it with your heaviest broadhead, vice versa. And then you can get the most accurate hunting arrows as well. So after you weighed your arrows, what you're going to do is you're going to do a spin test on them, and then you will spin each arrow. What you'll do is you'll rank your arrows from 1 to how many arrows you have. Like say I've got 5. 1 will be my best arrow and 5 will be my worst arrow. The next step is you're going to do paper tuning individually on each arrow. So you're going to rotate your nocks until you get the best tear on all of your arrows. So what you need to do is you need to take a piece of paper on your paper tuning jig, and you're going to mark the paper from 1 to 6, or how many arrows you have. I've marked it from 1 to 6. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take your number 1 arrow and you're going to shoot it, this is my number 1 arrow. So I'll take this arrow and then I'll shoot it below number 1. And then I'll shoot number 2 below number 2, and I'll go all the way through. And then after you've shot all your arrows, you're going to take the average of your tear. So the average is a high tear. Number 5 and number 1 is perfect bullet hole, but those are the only ones. But 4 out of the 6 arrows is slightly tail high. So you're going to adjust according to this. So if your cam sync is in, everything else is in, 4 out of the 6 arrows, number 2, 3, 4, and 6, that they bullet hole. Then what you'll find is you'll probably end up making 1, and number 5 is probably going to be a slight tail low. What you're going to do then is you're going to rotate the nock to the next vein. So you're going to ignore that mark for now. So in other words, you're going to rotate the nock so that this is now your indexing vein where this used to be. That's why I fletch all my arrows the same color, for this exact reason. Then you're going to reshoot those until they're bullet hole. If the one doesn't want to become a bullet hole, then you're just going to mark it, say, with an X, so that you know that arrow is just for practice and it's not ideal. It just doesn't want to group with the other ones, or it will probably group with them, but it doesn't want to give you the same exact tear as the other ones. And you definitely don't want to use that when you go out hunting, or that's not going to be your number one arrow. And then the very last step is to go out and just enjoy the work you put into the arrows. Go out to the range, shoot it, see if it groups, and just have a lot of fun with it. Enjoy the work that you put in. You're probably going to see the results. I hope so. And I hope these tips help you out a ton, and that you will be back in the future for more videos. And yeah, thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon.